Good afternoon, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Stuart Alexander. I'm Group Chief Exec over at GemCap. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to the Academy. For those who've not been on the GemCap Academy before, it is an opportunity for us to share with you some of the relevant knowledge that we have within the organization, but also to introduce you to businesses that we work with externally for GemCap in the UK and GemCap in Ireland. And today is part of that, and I'm delighted to welcome an old friend of mine, Julia Kirkland. Julia and I worked together a few years ago at Invesco, and Julia is currently the head of regulatory training and leadership development over at Zishi. I'm very tempted to say sushi, I do apologize. Zishi Cornerstone, previously known as FSTP. And as you're aware, we are hopefully going to be learning all about the regulatory horizon with a scan for the asset management industry today. So without further ado, I'll control everything. I'm going to go on to drop my video, and then you'll be left just with Julia. If people want to ask questions, please just pop them in the Q&A, and I'll reserve those and send them through to Julia. Okay, over to you, Julia.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Stuart. Good afternoon to everybody. This is going to be a real whistle stop, but I've actually written that on the first visual that you'll see in just a second. But whilst we've just got, I can see just a few more people are just joining us. I'll just do a very quick introduction to Zishi Cornerstone. Previously, we're sounding a little bit like Prince at the moment, previously known as FSTP. FSTP was a company that I formed with two co-partners some 10 years ago, and I've actually been a regulatory consultant for the last, actually this year it will be 20 years. So I've been doing this for a while and looking specifically at where the regulator is going for asset management, because that's my background. Stuart and I met at Invesco, as he says, many years ago. Zishi Cornerstone is the educational arm of a group called OSTC. We have three pillars basically that cover support and help for financial services firms, and that covers not just asset management, but all aspects of regulated financial services firms. First of all, we have our professional trading arm that looks after those people who are dealing and learning to trade in financial markets. We have our financial training, which covers technical topics, and that's through from anything from AI, M&A, quant, right the way through to our technical support of those requiring help on ESG. And then there is the part of the business that I look after, which is the regulatory part of the business, and we also look after leadership development. So we support a number of senior managers within financial services, and particularly across asset management, because as I say, it is my background. So we're working with a lot of SMFs, and this is something that we're doing regularly for our firms on an in-house basis, and obviously a very warm welcome to all of you today. It was difficult to know, given that we have a fairly short window of opportunity here with you today, to know what to put into this and what to leave out. And I've tried to cover off as much as I can. And as I've said, as you can see, it's getting very dark where I am, and my screen's very bright, so apologies there. So this is going to be a whistle-stop tour for you. I am going to just take you through some highlights with some visuals that I've put together, some key points from 2021 and into 22. We will have a quick look at the IFPR, quick look at UK MiFID, possible changes that might impact your investment managers with regard to liquidity and what they need to know there, best execution. And I'm just going to give you a bit of a flavour what I think the direction of travel is with regard to other aspects of UK MiFID that may impact you, that I think you should be looking out for. I'm then going to talk a bit about the proposed changes to the appointed representatives regime. There is going to be some new reporting there, but there is a significant increase in the obligations for principals, and we'll talk about that as we get to that. I know that that's something of interest. I have had a note from a couple of those of you who are attending that is something that you're quite interested in. Obviously, for asset management, it's quite key. What's going to change there, and what do we need to be doing? We will have a quick look at the long-term asset, the long-term asset funds from the policy statement that was issued towards the end of last year. And I'm going to talk about the sustainable change agenda again, just very quickly to round up with, and then open the floor up to you to ask any questions. As I say, as we go through this, you will probably spot lots of things that you think are actually quite important to asset management or quite important to your firm that we may or may not have a chance to talk about. But I'm happy towards the, as I say, towards the end of this to pick up on any questions. And also, if there's anything that you would directly like to ask me, then you can channel those through Stuart, and happy to have a discussion offline about anything that is more specific or sensitive to your firm specifically. Always happy to meet new people. So as I said, I wanted to just do a little bit of a roundup on what happened towards the end of 2021, and what do we think is going to overspill? What do I think in terms of themes are going to run into 22 for you? Probably shouldn't ignore the fact that we had some record-breaking fines right towards the end of the year, notably for Credit Suisse and HSBC. Both of them are not wholly unconnected with regard to financial crime and anti-money laundering due diligence. It just doesn't go away. So I think it's important that we need to take responsibility as asset managers to make sure that our people are informed, systems, procedures, controls are always updated. These don't just go on a shelf and they should be forgotten, because, as I say, those are not insignificant fines that we've seen. The one in the middle, we're obviously going to come back to when we talk about the sustainable climate change agenda towards the end of the session. But we do have, from the 1st of January 2022, the requirement for asset managers to disclose how they tackle climate-related risks and opportunities, and how they take that into account when they are managing investments. As I say, we're going to come back to that one, because I think there's again, anecdotally, from talking to people in the market, I think there are some key things and things to take away for you from this session. UCITS, for those where this has perhaps passed you by, the packaged retail and insurance-based investment products, or PRIPS regulation, has essentially been put on hold for us, for those of us who are running UCITS funds. We basically have the situation that we're in, where we can either supply those, and I always call this a kid with two eyes, kids with two eyes, or we can be using that, because I'm conscious of the fact that a number of asset managers actually turned around the requirements for PRIPS and actually got PRIPS kids already in place. You can still use those, but essentially it's going to be a bit of a watch this space for the next 5 years. You can use either or. You will be meeting your obligations if you're using either or. Also, I think, and it's the two boxes on either side of the screen there that you've got. The new customer duty obligations will start to come into play from July 2022. And this is for anybody who is designing products or marketing products or trying to explain products to retail clients, and the support they have in place for when things might potentially go wrong. You probably all saw this as well. I noticed that the Treasury Select Committee just this week have put the FCA under some pressure to make sure that they bring to a close the investigation of the Woodford funds. This is not wholly unconnected with that. I rather suspect, knowing and working with the regulator as I do, that they are expecting that out of their investigations for what happened at Woodford, they will be using that to start building for us, those of us that remain in the business. They will be building examples, good and poor practice. The regulator has got a lot better at doing this over the years, trying to teach the rest of the market, or the people that they regulate, I should describe you as the people that they regulate, how they can use the examples of the past and how they can adapt that into their good and poor practice activities. And as I say, not unconnected with essentially a thrust from the regulator of the consumer investment strategy. Now, this will actually mean some changes to the way in which we actually transact within asset management. It's particularly looking at, as we're going to cover it, the appointed rep regime, but we can expect to see some changes in financial promotions and the financial promotions regime. That's going to include classification of high risk investments, further segmenting of high risk, supplementing the definitions that we have for the high risk market. And we're going to see some inclusions of strengthening the requirements on funds when we approve our financial promotions. Now, somebody who has trained out of financial promotions for a lot of years, one of the things that I would always say to firms is, in the first instance, you have to know what the financial promotion rules are. And often it's going to be the front office that aren't as familiar with the rules around financial promotions as they probably should be. As things are going to change, we've got a chance to rebase. So let's have a look at the implementation of the IFPR. So for those of you who love the abbreviations that the regulator is always keen to introduce, let's make sure that we're all on the same page with this one. The investment firm prudential regulation was introduced with effect from January this year. And who does it apply to? Well, basically, it's going to be, without seeing any of your company names, I can imagine that this is going to cover most of you. So it's all MiFID investment firms, collective portfolio management investment firms, and regulated and unregulated holding companies of groups that contain either of the above. And that's important here. And particularly when we're doing work with senior managers, one of the things that we're always talking to them about is being able to articulate, not just to us as their consultants, but also to articulate to the regulator how your holding company works and the influence that they have over your organization. And IFPR is another piece of regulation which really brings those holding groups into scope of the reach of the FCA. It's important to note, because some of you may well be in this circumstance. If you are a dual regulated firm, then the IFPR does not apply to those PRA designated investment firms. So if you represent one of the designated investment firms here today, you are still subject to the prudential rules that are put together by the PRA. this is really to increase the reach of the FCA, who are looking after the prudential aspects of those of you who are just solo regulated. So the key changes is it introduces one single prudential regime, which is good. It does, I think, provide an enormous amount of clarity with regard to meaningful capital and liquidity requirements for firms. And it also means that firms will be required to publicly disclose certain information on certain areas. Now, there is still some discussion about what the definition of publicly disclose is. Most people are taking the line of least resistance, which is we need to have this somewhere on our website. But you will be, as firms, releasing and disclosing more detail, the list of which is there. And what I'll do for you, I should have said this already, but what I will do is I will make sure that Stuart has a copy of these slides, so anybody who wants to see any of these visuals afterwards to refer to, then he'll be able to get a copy to you. But the significant piece, I think, for senior managers, and when we're doing a lot of board and senior management work, is the ICAP, which I would hope that most of you are familiar with, particularly if you are in senior roles within the firm, is being replaced by the ICARA, which is the Individual Capital and Risk Assessment. Now, that might just sound like a semantic change on the name ICAP, but again, as somebody who's done reviews with firms, and particularly in asset management, on their ICAP should have been telling a story about how they manage their risk. The ICARA really is, because of the requirements of the ICARA, the details of which we don't have time to go into. So again, happy to take anything offline if anybody wants some more detail on this. But the ICARA really forces you into that situation where you have to be linking your capital adequacy to the story of your firm and how you manage risk, and how the data that you're getting helps you manage the risks within your business. So in terms of the material aspect of this and what's changed as of January this year, is it does link that risk management process really to, as one aspect of it that I've highlighted here, your stress testing. It's one of those points that leads into the involvement, as it says from the second bullet, of the Chief Investment Officer has to have been not only at the time when you were looking at what the impact of this regulation was and how you needed to be ready, because there were certain submissions that you had to make by December of last year, 2021, the CIO should have been involved in that project, and they must be intrinsically involved in the calculation and the MI that goes into the ICARA going forward. Now, you will all have, if you're asset management firms, you'll have a new ICARA date. Some of you, that could actually be quite some way out, but you will have had to have submitted that date for your ICARA to be ready to the regulator. Don't as such have to submit that ICARA, you just need to have it ready, because it will be the first thing that the regulator will want to ask for if they are doing a supervisory visit with you, or if, God forbid, you're under any sort of investigation. It does mean, I would suggest to you, because again, your Chief Investment Officer should have been involved. You need to know who your material risk takers are, and the senior staff need to know what the impact is of these changes on the way in which you calculate your remuneration, which has to be clearly documented now in a much more formalized fashion than it has done previously. You have to be aware that this new regulation also brings a certain amount of scrutiny to your diversity policy that you have with regard to the way in which your makeup of your senior management is constructed. And you'll have to be making those adjustments to make sure that you're ready for making those public disclosures as information is available. So that's the IFPR. Let's have a look at UK MiFID. Exclamation mark, question mark there. this is work in progress. We can expect over the next few years, I would suggest that you will have more things, more changes to existing regulation that will get badged as UK MiFID. This is the regulator, if you like the analogy that I'm making for people, this is where the regulator is tearing the existing regulations to pieces, and particularly looking at the regulation that was MiFID and MiFID II related, and seeing where there are changes that they would like to have for us. Now we are outside of Europe, and the rule book is the UK's rule book, and outside of Europe. So what have we seen, and what's likely to come up? Well, there's more transparency around liquid bonds and the reporting of transactions in those types of vehicles. It is an expectation from the regulator that you are using those reports that they produce to help you, again, with your risk management of products. So those should be things that your people who are specifically looking after bonds are cognizant of, and they are seen to use that data, even if it's only to a minor degree. How does it feed into your risk management processes of those types of investments? Best execution, most of you, I would hope, will be aware that you are no longer required to prepare your RTS 27, which is the report on your website, and that's where it should have been. And trust me, I have read some absolutely shocking ones that asset managers have put together. This is the report on how you achieve best execution. It should have been a client-centric document, but in a lot of instances, people's RTS 27 was almost unreadable. The regulator has recognised that, and they've said, you know what, let's put a stop on it. You don't have to update your RTS 27, but be prepared that they will want to put something in its place. So that could be one of those new changes that we might see, and I would highlight that. And then we've had some changes to research. With effect from the 1st of March, asset managers and research firms have more access to research, which is essentially going to be free, and we don't have to account for this in the way that we did under MiFID II. And it includes, for example, research provided by research providers who don't provide execution services, or if it's widely available research. So there are there is some more latitude there to the way in which we receive research as asset managers, which may or may not be helpful to us. We may have circumnavigated this since the new rules on research came in. Again, this is a bit of a whistle stop. I could talk to you for the rest of the day about research and best execution, for example, but our time does not allow. But again, any specific questions, I'm happy to try and pick those up for you at the end of this session, or you can shoot those through to Stuart and I can pick those up afterwards. For me, I would say, just rounding up this piece for you, obviously I would say watch this space, wouldn't I? But please do have in your mind that the regulator has tried to make it clear. Whether or not they achieve this or not is only the test of time will be able to demonstrate that. But what I would say is that equivalency is the key. They are not looking to disadvantage UK firms in any way by introducing something under the guise of MiFID, of UK MiFID, that's going to disadvantage us. So there are rafts and rafts of people at the regulator who are looking very closely at the MiFID II regulations that are incorporated within the rule book to say, if we change this, are we happy that we are putting something in that gives our firms at least equivalency to those in Europe? So what am I trying to say there? I would expect a lot of MiFID II to remain because if it's not broke, they're not going to try and fix it. Changes to the appointed rep. I know that a few of you, so I'm just going to put some lights on here, just so that you can see me when the screen goes to dark. Changes to the appointed representative regime. Now, on the face of it, I think there's a lot of people who are in a position where they're looking at this and thinking to themselves, actually, how much does this affect asset management? But of course it does, because a number of you will be using appointed representatives, or there are asset managers who are appointed representatives of a principal. So this does impact us, I would say. So I think again, if we're looking at your homework beyond this, I would strongly suggest that if you haven't already, you need to have a look at the consultation paper 2134. Consultation ends on the 3rd of March, which isn't all that long. It's not a huge document, so you can get through it reasonably easily. But I think the important takeaways from this is that principals, those firms who are acting as principals, who have appointed representatives, need to understand there is going to be a much higher level of additional information that the regulator is going to want ahead of appointing an appointed representative, or ahead of any changes to those appointed representatives. And that's probably something that's new for us to be aware of. They are looking at more timely reporting. So, for example, when we're looking at the appointment of an appointed representative, they must have a certain amount of information 60 days prior to you taking them on board as an appointed representative. Or, of course, if you are becoming an appointed representative, you should expect somebody at your principal to be asking you for this data, and you need to get it in, because you can't act unless it's gone through to the regulator, and that's within 60 days of the appointment. They're going to take a dim view if we can't stick to that deadline. This is all about strengthening the responsibilities of the principal. There is rafts of data in the CP document that will tell you why they're doing this. And this is basically to make sure that we have time to look to see who is becoming appointed representatives. We have time to make sure that they're competent and they're capable, that we have at least seen basic MI on the firm that we are appointing, and that we can demonstrate that we have, as a regulated entity, if we are the principal, that we have taken reasonable steps in our due diligence of our appointed reps. That's key here. So if you are a principal and you have appointed reps, you have to understand that piece around being able to demonstrate that you have taken reasonable steps. And this is the regulator helping you to understand what those minimum reasonable steps are. If I had £1 for every client who'd ever said to me, when it comes to regulation, Julia, what's the minimum that I have to do? And I always say to them, oh, that's a really great premise to start on when we're looking at a business. What's the minimum that I have to do to stay in business? Is really what you're saying. If we're regulated entities, that's what we're doing. Meeting the regulatory requirements means that we can stay in business. Now, the regulator has recognised that there is this demand for tell us. We can't make up what our reasonable steps are. So we've got what we asked for here, really. This is the regulator saying that too many clients have complained about appointed representatives. So we've got to take principals in hand and start telling them what is the minimum we require. So we're going to have to include details of what their business is, what their revenue is, what complaints they've had against them in the past, and that includes what their regulated and their non-regulated activities are. Now, that minimum is going to apply to those people who are merely appointed introducer appointed representatives. So only you will know whether or not you have, or you are associated with, or you are an introducer appointed representative. The other details that they will demand of you is they want you to make it clear that you have activities that are dealt with by an appointed representative. So that's going to go on the register against the principal. You've got to annually check that the details that were submitted 60 days prior to you appointing this person is now still up to date, and you've got 60 days after the your accounting period to make sure that it's still accurate. You've got to annually submit the complaints data, and again you've got a time period of that of 30 days from your accounting period. And you're going to have to make sure, and there are going to be some exemptions here for introducer appointed representatives. There is only a limited amount of information that you'll have to provide, particularly because a lot of introducer ARs, their other business or their main reason to be is not regulated. So they do roll it back a little bit for those introducers. But you should be making sure with your appointed representatives who are not introducer representatives that you have assessed their fitness, their senior managers, as fit and proper to carry out the job that you have asked them to do. So you have to make sure that they've evidenced to you that they're experienced and that they're trained, that they have experience in the activities, that you are confident that they can carry out this business, and that obviously all of this is documented. That if they are senior managers, that they can carry out their responsibilities of being senior managers and doing what you've asked them to do, and that they have the requisite skills and knowledge to undertake the tasks which you're assigning to them. So this is, I would suggest to you, if this is a point of interest, you need to go and have a look at CP 2134, or obviously alternatively, if we have time towards the end, ask some questions. There have been some, what's been one of the catalysts to this, if it's not clear why they're doing all of this, on top of what I've already said, don't forget we've got this Green Seal Capital Securities, which was the appointed representative of Mirabella Advisors LLP, which was the regulated entity, and the cost to investors and all of the investigation that the regulator is doing as part of that has highlighted again, if it wasn't already, that the appointed representatives regime had to be looked at. Long-term asset funds, I don't intend to spend long on this. I'm sure some of you where you have these already know who the likely investors are for the long-term assets funds. It is essentially a new asset class, but it is a category of funds that is different from the qualifying investor schemes that we've had around for years and years. All of the usual suspects that you would expect to be able to invest in a quiz are going to be there listed for you. I think the important thing for you to remember with the long-term assets and where this is going from the policy statement 2114 is that the regulator is looking very closely at what are the advantages of being able to market these to retail investors at some stage. But in terms of the asset managers and what you need to be aware of if you are running these long-term asset funds, or if you've decided that you're going to look at these, is there is a requirement for a much higher level of governance. You obviously have those longer redemption periods and tighter rules around your redemption periods, additional disclosures because of the nature of the underlying illiquid assets, and you've got to be able to demonstrate that you have very strong liquidity management, and not disconnected with that require of the liquidity changes and the reports that we see out of the regulator. They are trying to help you with this, but they need you to have taken on board that if you're going to manage these types of assets, you're going to have to demonstrate that you know how to do it and you can show them that you can do it. So a bit of a whistle stop there on the long-term assets. Let's have a quick look at the sustainable change. Obviously, it's the hot topic. What would I note to you? What do I think of in terms of direction of travel? Well, it was back on the 3rd of November at COP26 when the CEO of the FCA on the Financial Services Day, where they had a number of initiatives discussed at COP26. The financial sector can only support the transition effectively if customers can trust firms to deliver on their promises. That was a bit hard-hitting, wasn't it? We're committed to seeing climate change and sustainability integrated into all financial transactions, not just dedicated sustainable labelled securities and investment. And it brings me on to my anecdotal point that I put in blue. Was talking to an NED just a couple of weeks ago, just before Christmas, and he said, my biggest issue as an NED in an asset management firm is how do I challenge appropriately to find out whether or not we are greenwashing. I know I don't have to explain what greenwashing is to all of you here, but that's his challenge. Now, I would turn that round to those of us who are sitting there as practitioners in asset management and say, surely the responsibility should be on us to make it clear to people who are in senior management roles, and particularly NEDs, that we're not greenwashing, and we're not just putting labels on things to make it look as if we've understood what this whole agenda is about. I think you can expect more scrutiny, again, not unconnected with what I've just said there about beware of greenwashing. I would strongly suggest that you need to have a look at DP 21.4. It is about the new disclosures and the investment product labels, and it goes back to that point that was on the first slide about the sustainable disclosure requirements, SDR, which are now in play. So if you're not cognizant of that, you need to bring yourself up to speed with that if you are responsible for investment aspects within your firm. And then I would just say that the Global Sustainable Investment Review 2020 from government is probably worth a read. There's probably not a lot in there that you wouldn't expect to see in there or that hasn't been rehashed by other documents. But the reason I highlight that particularly is because I have come across a firm where they were quoting from that, and when I asked them about that, they didn't know that they were quoting from that. So I think be very aware of what your marketing department are putting onto your website and what's going out to your clients and what you're saying to your distributors about your response to the sustainable change agenda. Because as I say, that's not uncommon, that example that I found where people didn't know what was going on to their website, or they didn't know where they were quoting from. That's all going to lead the regulator to believe that actually you're just paying lip service to this. So that's my sweeping generalisation of the sustainable change agenda. Again, that's another thing we could spend the rest of the day and probably the rest of the week talking about, I dare say. I'm sure it's a hot topic for a number of you, and I probably haven't said anything that you hadn't already thought of before, but just as a highlight for you. I'm just very conscious of the fact that this is a relatively short session. So if anybody wants to give us some instant feedback, if you put your phone up against the QR code, you can do some, you can just take a photo of that one. That will lead you through to a feedback form, and Stuart will obviously see whether or not this has been useful, whether or not it hasn't. I will make sure that Stuart has a copy of the slides so you can get hold of those. I'm happy to pick up on any questions. And is it all right, Stuart, if I put the light on? Because I am sitting here in the dark.
Yeah, sorry. We won't keep you in the dark all afternoon. Julia, thank you so much for that. It was very, very interesting. And I certainly learned a lot. That's great stuff. Look, thanks to everyone attending today. If you've got any further questions for Julia or for us, please do drop me a line directly either through LinkedIn if you come that way, or obviously those people who know me directly. We have got further sessions coming up with marketing, and actually Julia back on again in a couple of weeks' time, I think, or something else. So anyway, watch the space. Do see what's coming up on the GemCap Academy on our website. And once again, thank you for your attendance today.